Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 5th webinar in our series of Life After Furlough by the employment team at Wilkin Chapman Solicitors. We're trialling a new Zoom package today, so those of you that have been on our previous webinars will notice a few differences. The reason we're a few minutes late is because we had a practice yesterday and it all ran completely smoothly. We were sharing our screen and everything, no issues at all. Of course, today when we've come to do it live, we're having a few issues with the PowerPoint share. So we'll have to send the slides out to you afterwards, and we might be binning this new Zoom package. But let me tell you a bit about what we're going to be covering today. So today's webinar is being hosted jointly with Hays Specialist Recruitment. A number of you might attend our quarterly seminars we normally do with Hays, which involves getting up rather early, getting to a hotel and having a bacon bun, whilst we then Katie and I talk to you together with Hays about a certain topic. So at least you didn't have to get up at the crack of dawn to listen to us all today. I'm joined today by fellow partner Katie Davies and also by Olivia Hawkins. Olivia is the Director for North and East Yorkshire and North East Lincolnshire, and she is going to be speaking to us today as well. So let's see if we can get one thing right in terms of the Zoom package, which is on the eve, obviously, of the launch of Flexible Furlough, which all kicks off tomorrow. I'd like to ask you to participate in our first poll of the webinar. So hopefully the poll will come up on your screen. Oh yes, it's come up on mine. So have you got employees returning to work in the next few weeks on Flexible Furlough? Interested in how many of you are going to take advantage of the new scheme, which we spoke a lot about on our last webinar, Oliver and I. So I'll just give you a few more seconds to cast your votes. And it looks like it's going to be pretty popular. So we've got sort of hovering around the 60% of you are going to have people returning to Flexible Furlough in the next couple of weeks. So good luck with the calculations. If you need any help from in relation to those, please ask your accountant or go on the government guidance, because unfortunately, or fortunately for us, Katie and I are not specialists on the calculation for Flexible Furlough. So today, Katie and I are going to be covering answers to the key questions around options for restructuring your workforce, as well as the current burning issues around employers who are trying to get employees back to the workplace. Who can you ask to come back and when? A survey by Working Families has revealed in the last few days that 90% of employees want their employers to maintain the flexible working practices that have had to be introduced as a result of the pandemic. They want them in long term, which might be good news for them, but maybe not good news for you as employers. Whilst I doubt that we're going to go back to the way we all used to work pre-lockdown, I suspect many of you will feel that during this period you've maybe not got the best out of your employees for maybe a variety of reasons. Hays have produced a plethora of free resources and reports to assist you at this time and beyond COVID. So I'm now going to hand over to Olivia to explain what's available from Hays to support you at this time. Olivia.
Thanks, Teresa. So I did have some nice slides to show you all of this, but I can't share them. So I'm just going to talk you through this, and then we'll send you out the slides afterwards. Yeah, so I thought it would be useful just to share some of the content and the resources that Hays have put together to support businesses and employees, and indeed people that are looking for work as well during this time. So we've created a community hub called Inspire Me in the New Era of Work that holds lots and lots of different content and training material that you can use, and it's all free of charge. You can download whichever bits of it that you feel are useful for you. We created this at the beginning of lockdown when we were all thrown a huge curveball and needed to find our way through our rapidly changing marketplace. And the hub's developed over the last few months, and so as well as the original content, we've got lots of new resources to support as you transition back from working at home to perhaps a new hybrid model, or however your business is moving forward. So if you want some practical tips on recruiting and onboarding virtually, or a more in-depth view of market considerations, we've added a new guide this week called Returning from Furlough, which is for businesses and employees. And that provides some advice and tips on moving your workforce safely back into the new workplace from an operational people point of view, and also from a technology point of view, as well as steps on maintaining well-being. And this hub is updated weekly, so the content sometimes changes and we'll add new content, but there will always be information on there on well-being, remote working, blogs, articles, and top tips to help you. So I've got a slide ready with some of the top content on there, so I'll just talk you through it now. So there is a market insight survey on there, which we've taken information from over 16,000 professionals across the UK during the period of April and May. And it really examines the impact of COVID on employer and employee. It provides some information on the outlook of our economic recovery as well, and also what skills employees are looking for and how the recruitment market is moving. So it's a really interesting report to look at. We've got a wellbeing report, which again is taken from 12,000 professionals during the same period, and that really helps understand the impact of lockdown on well-being, and gives some insights to make some real changes and benefits for your team as well. And there's a new era of work report, which there's one for employees and there's one for employers on there as well. And again, that gives some practical tips and advice on moving back into the workplace. And it gives some insights from some experts within Hays as well, and how we are looking at that and other organisations are looking at that. So some useful things for you to look at. And then there's a work transition toolkit as well, which is part of our Hays Thrive offering, which some of you may have already heard of. But we've partnered with a training provider called Go1 to provide some free training that you can download, and you can be, or you can join. It's like a portal, so you can go on there, and it says 14 training courses on the slides that I've got, but there's actually more than that on there. There's training on there on digital collaboration for Office 365, change management, project management, how to work remotely at home, well-being, health and safety, and moving back into the workplace tips as well. If you sign up to that, you can sign one person in your team up to it, you can sign a whole team, a whole company up to it, and it provides management information as well on who's completed the courses. And if you want to, you can upload your own company content onto that portal as well. So we've got lots of people already using it and finding it useful. So I can always give you more information on that if that's something you're interested in. And then we've got a career transition modular outplacement support offering as well. So if you do find yourself in the position of having to do a restructure or unfortunately make some redundancies, there is some support on there for that as well. So the chain, it's looked at weekly. There's lots of different information that's added on a weekly basis for you, and it's really easy to access. You just go to, so there's a link that I will send out. You just click on the link, download the content that you are interested in, and it's as easy as that, really. So that's it now, because I don't have the slides to show, so I'll hand back to Teresa.
I'm sure very interesting. Thank you very much, Alima, and not as easy without the slides, I'm sure. As all of you know, much changes on a weekly, if not sometimes a daily basis with the government guidance, and we're going to talk through some of the changes in the last week and how they'll be impacting you. But one thing I wanted to ask you next is to launch our second poll. So our second poll is really about that returning to the workplace. So are the majority of your employees currently working from home, working between home and the workplace, or permanently in the workplace. Because I think we do get a bit of a skewed view about this, in terms of, yes, the government is saying that more people can go back to the workplace, but certainly there are a lot of employers with still a lot of people working from home, many of whom are insisting to carry on working from home. Okay, so the results have now come in. So between 39 and 40%, just changing slightly, are working from home. Similarly, between home and the workplace, and only 23% permanently in the workplace. So there are still a lot of people working between the two. Katie, obviously in the last week, the government has updated the guidance on those that are shielding, for example, and when they can return to work. Can you guide us through that, please, in terms of what those changes are?
Yes, thanks, Teresa. So basically, as we know, there's a category of employee who are classed as extremely clinically vulnerable, and these are the 2 million odd people who have been shielding on the advice of the NHS, the government. So these are the people who got the letter from their doctor, from the NHS, saying they must stay at home. It's advisable that they stay at home. Now, we know that lots of other employees have been saying that they should be shielding or they're vulnerable, but it's only the people with the letters who are actually shielding. And these are people who obviously have serious underlying conditions such as cancer, and they're really high risk. So the advice now has changed over the last week or so because the risk factor has gone down, and the advice now is from the 1st of August, these individuals are no longer going to be shielding. So we don't know if that's going to come back again. Look at what happens in Leicester overnight with the lockdown again, but hopefully from the 1st of August, these individuals won't be shielding. So what does that mean? Well, obviously that means on the 1st of August, you could get them all back into work. However, these are obviously people who are high risk. They're going to be feeling apprehensive. They've probably been at home for the last 12 weeks. They may have been working from home, but what the government is calling on in relation to employers is to try and ease the transition of these people back into the workplace, because they're going to be worried, they're going to be apprehensive, and so you can't just suddenly expect them all to turn up on the 1st of August as if nothing's happened. So you need to have your robust procedures in place, your risk assessments, and you've got to communicate with these people. You know, address their fears, get them in to see what you've done in relation to social distancing, see what risk assessments you've got, explain to them what you've put in place. If they've got concerns, try and address those. So don't just expect them all to suddenly turn up on the 1st of August. You need to be speaking to them. If they can work from home and continue to do so, in my opinion, let them carry on doing so, because it's better to ease it in over time. Obviously, the risk factor will hopefully continue to go down. And in a way, while they're working at home, you haven't got the problem of them being in your workplace. If you need them back, then you need to be talking to them. Can you put adjustments in place? Can you just get them into mornings? So any kind of, you know, differences that you can make which will help them feel more comfortable. If you can't get them back safely and it's too high a risk for them to be at work in the workplace, then is it safer to keep them on furlough if they've been on furlough before or are on furlough? Because Teresa and I have got lots of clients who have put these kind of people on furlough because of the risk, and they can't get them into work and they can't work from home. Obviously, furlough is continuing until the 31st of October. So it might be that you just keep them on furlough and keep reviewing it, and then working with them to ease the transition back into the workplace. But for these people, you've got to make sure that your procedures are robust, because obviously they're still high risk.
So, and what about those individuals that the government calls vulnerable, but that are not shielding? What's the current advice about their return to work?
Yes, so they're the slightly lower category. They're at risk, but they're not quite as risky as the critical, you know, the extreme shielding people. So these are the people who are over 70 or under 70 but have some underlying issue. They might have the flu jab, so they might have something like bronchitis, pneumonia, some respiratory disease. So those people are at risk, but they can return to the workplace. However, the guidance is still, if these people can work from home safely and can do the job, to keep them at home, because government advice is these people should stay at home as much as possible and they should minimise the contact with other people. So if they can work from home, allow them to do so. You might start easing people back in. If they're not working effectively from home, that's a different issue, and can you address that? If they can't work from home in their job, the government advice is, can they work from home in a different position, even if it's a temporary measure? So that's another thing to consider. If they can't work from home and you need them back in the workplace, the government advice is to put them in the safest job at your workplace. So that's actually meaning, can you give them another job as a temporary measure? There's no requirement to create new jobs, but if there's something that they could do, like a project for a couple of months, which is less risky and is keeping social distancing, then consider that. This is about thinking outside the box. We're not in the normal situation. If, again, they can't work safely, if they can't maintain a 2-metre social distance and it's going to be 1 or less, you have to consider whether the risks are acceptable, because what you don't want is you placing them at risk, them refusing to come into work, having potential unfair dismissal claims and any health and safety issues. So you've got to try and work with the individual to get them back and getting them productive and working as much as possible. Again, if they can't safely work in the office and they can't work from home, if they've been furloughed, can you carry on doing that? Yes, I know that's an additional expense from August, but again, is it better than forcing them back in? Or if you have people, for example, who are pregnant, are there other things you can do, such as medical suspension? Again, these are going to have a cost impact, but it's about thinking about the other things you can do if you can't get them safely back into the workplace. Teresa, obviously employers are now bringing people back. We're coming out of lockdown. If, for example, an employer wants the employees back, but it hasn't got enough work to keep them busy all their time, their contracted hours, what can an employer do?
Okay, so we've got a few options here. Obviously, we can utilise flexible furlough scheme, but that's only provided that the person has been furloughed for at least 3 weeks prior to the end of June. So hopefully, as many of you said, you were going to utilise the flexible furlough scheme. So as you know, those hours that they are working are paid fully, and those that are not are claimed under the flexible furlough scheme. Once flexible furlough ends, or if you've got an individual who's not eligible for the flexible furlough scheme, then you can look as an employer to reduce hours and pay for the employee. So you don't want to be looking maybe at making them redundant, but what you do want to be doing is keeping them and retaining their skills throughout this period, and probably beyond when the government flexible furlough scheme is in operation. But you can only do this with the employee's agreement. So that's going to require you as the employer to have individual consultation with the affected employees to try and get them to agree to reduce their hours and their pay. Now, if as a business you recognise a trade union for collective bargaining purposes, then you might be able to agree the change with the union depending on the terms of the collective agreement. That might then bind all of the employees. We also need to consider collective consultation. So depending on how many employees at which locations that you operate from are impacted, if we've got 20 or more impacted and you're looking to reduce their hours and or pay, then certainly you need to be considering collective consultation as an employer as well. Now, some of you might have forgotten about this, but before the whole furlough scheme started, what we were all talking about is, have you got a contractual right to impose short-time working on your employees? So many of you as employers may have layoff or short-time working clauses in your contracts of employment. If you've got those, then you don't just have to rely on the flexible furlough scheme. You can impact and use the contractual right that you've got in the employee's contract of employment. What I would say is to try and get agreement around all of these things at the moment as an employer. It's better to try and do it on a temporary basis, subject to review after a few months, because people are far more likely to agree to do that than you as an employer trying to change their contract long term around the fact that there's not enough work for them to do.
If, for example, an employer wants to bring people back and it's got quite a lot of work, but it can't afford to pay their normal rate of pay, can an employer reduce an employee's rate of pay?
Yes, yes, you can as an employer. The process really is the same as I've just gone through on about reducing hours and pay. It may be more difficult to persuade employees to agree to be working, let's say, 100% of their time, but only receiving 80 or 90% of their pay. What you need to do if you're going to do any of these measures in terms of reducing pay or reducing hours and pay as an employer is you've got to be able to explain your rationale. And you can't just say, oh, it's because of coronavirus. You need to be explaining to your employees the impact that the coronavirus has had on your business, the reasons why it's been impacted, what the business cost is in relation to that. So you've really got to build yourself a mini business case in detail to explain it to employees. They're more likely then to buy into that and going to get less employee discontent if you're looking particularly at them working their full hours and being on reduced pay for that period of time.
What if employees don't agree, Teresa, though? Can employers force it through? What are the options?
Now, you need to consult individually, as I mentioned earlier, with the employee and explain the reasons and the necessity for the proposed change. That has to happen. But if the employee still refuses, after you've had some additional time, try to allay their concerns and explain it, you're going to need to decide as an employer whether you're going to impose that change upon them. So it's always better to get to get agreement rather than trying to unilaterally impose something on the employees. Depending on how much you're, for example, reducing their pay or reducing their hours, what we would probably be in is a situation where we would have to then dismiss the employee by giving them notice under their current contractual terms. So if their notice period, for example, is 2 weeks, you'd have to give them 2 weeks notice to bring their current contract of an employment to an end and re-engage them. So seek to re-employ them on the new terms with the reduced pay or the reduced hours and pay. Dismissal in these circumstances can be fair. So you are dismissing your employee, but you've got to have a clear business reason for doing it, and you have to have followed the fair process of consultation. So it's not something to be taken on lightly. I would really urge you to seek our advice before you dismiss employees if they're not prepared to agree to pay cuts or hours and pay cuts. And as I mentioned earlier, if it potentially you're going to be dismissing 20 or more employees on one site, then collective consultation is going to kick in, which is going to probably, if you're looking to do this on a temporary measure, make it unsustainable to dismiss and re-engage. I do know a number of employer clients, if they've had a few people that have refused to agree to a change, they have actually imposed, for example, the pay cut upon the employees, and wait and see whether the employees object to that change. What reaction do they get? When they know 99% of their colleagues are all agreeing, they tend, when pushed, to reluctantly agree. But ultimately, obviously, if you're in a situation where you've got a reduced need, you might want to consider redundancy as a possible alternative. So, Katie, in relation to redundancy during or after furlough, do you think there are any other options that employers need to be considering first?
Yes, Teresa, definitely. I mean, we're not in the normal situation. This pandemic has created a unique situation. So employees are being more willing to agree to changes, temporary, permanent, than ever before. They're being very reasonable. I mean, we do have the odd one, of course, you always will, but most employees are being open to changes. It's not the usual situation where 6 months ago, employees might have been reluctant, might have resisted changes because they thought that the company was just trying to line its own pockets. Employees are fully aware that these things are necessary to save their jobs, to keep businesses going. They only have to switch the news on to see all the redundancies out there. So before you go and consider redundancies, and you may need to do it, you need to obviously look at the other options. And like you said, Teresa, if you set out very clearly to the employees what the issues are, you know, we've got 50% less work, our profits are down 50%. So it is very clear why you're taking the action. And if you say to them, look, let's try and do this, we'll review it, it's only short term, and you get the employees on board and you communicate, they are more likely to agree if they think they're going to save their job. Also, you might have employees who've been affected personally by COVID, maybe themselves or a family member, and apprehensive about coming back to work. Or we've also got the problem of people with childcare issues. I know employers always say to us, don't they, Teresa, childcare is not my responsibility, but we are in a weird situation where people can't do anything about it. You know, grandparents might have looked after children and they can't send them to school. So if employees can't work from home and they can't get to work because of childcare, you've got to think outside the box. You know, are these people willing to go on some kind of unpaid parental leave or an unpaid sabbatical? So they keep their job, so they're not redundant, they keep their job, but you as the employer don't pay them. They're going to continue to accrue holidays, so there's that cost implication. But if that's a short-term measure, which means you're not paying them full pay, they're at home and they can deal with whatever issues they've got, and that's all put in writing and it's agreed, it's saving their job and it's saving you some money for the short term until hopefully things pick up, or you can assess better in a couple of months' time how your business is going to react. Because the problem we've got at the moment, isn't it, Teresa, is we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if businesses are going to pick up and when they're going to pick up. So discuss with the employee, make it clear what the issues are, how short-term or long-term they are, and get them on board with you. And people are more willing to agree to things at the moment.
Certainly. I mean, I've got a number of employer clients, for example, that are considering redundancy, but have decided, well, let's wait a month or so to see what's happening now that the economy is getting going a bit more, and they're prepared to sit on their hands rather than make a knee-jerk decision to commence necessarily redundancies if things are picking up in their sector or their type of work. But in relation, Katie, to making redundancies, those individuals that are on furlough at the moment, full furlough or indeed flexible furlough starting from tomorrow, what's the position about making redundancies for those individuals?
Yeah, there was some confusion, I think, at the beginning, and lots of clients were phoning us up saying, I've read something and it says it's unfair to make people redundant when they're on furlough or while furlough's still there. And I think some of that confusion was caused by the fact that the guide for employers in relation to the job retention scheme didn't specifically address redundancy. It said that redundancy rights continue, which implies, but it didn't deal with it. The employees guide, however, did, and said that employees can be made redundant. So the answer is employees can be made redundant while furlough is there. Then the second point is it a fair dismissal? And then it's the usual procedures and things that Teresa and I talk about is in relation to, is it a fair reason? Have you got a business case? Now, obviously, a lot of employees are saying at the moment, well, why can't you wait till the 31st of October? That's what furlough's there for, to keep my job there. You've got to show that you've kind of considered it. So you might want to say, well, we can't afford to keep you on until that period because of X, Y, Z. And obviously, as we know, from August, the furlough scheme is changing and you're going to have to contribute to auto-enrolments, the pension costs and national insurance costs. And from September and October, there are then contributions towards salary of 10% and 20%. So the cost implications in relation to furlough are increasing. So I have some clients who are saying, well, I can't wait till the 31st of October because I have this amount of people and it's going to cost me this amount of money because the furlough scheme is changing. So the tribunal would look at everything, the overall picture, to consider whether any dismissal was fair. And part of that would be, why have you acted now? And if you've got your business case, we can't wait because profits have gone down, we have to make cutbacks, we need to remove this amount of people, and if we don't, we might end up making more redundancies. So actually it's saving people. So as long as you've got your business case, there is nothing stopping redundancies. There's also a benefit for making redundancies during furlough because you can recover up to 80% of the notice pay. So you can't recover any of the redundancy, only notice, and obviously that may change the contribution as the contributions change from you, the employer, in October and September. But again, that's a significant amount of money that you could recover as the employer if you act now rather than wait. Also, as Teresa said, if you've got collective consultation obligations and you've got 30 days or 45 days to consult, can you afford to wait until the 31st of October before you take action? So the answer is you can make redundancies. It comes to the overall test of, have you got your business case? Is it fair?
Now, a number of employers have asked me, well, I chose which employees I put on furlough. I kept my best employees working. Can I simply select those individuals that I've got left on furlough at the moment as those that are to be made redundant? What would you say about that, Katie?
Yeah, we are seeing this a lot, aren't we, Teresa? So yes, you can't automatically select the people who are on furlough and make those redundant. That would be an unfair dismissal because your selection process would be unfair. That's basic redundancy principles. It might be that you have somebody on furlough who is doing a unique role, so no one else does that role. So you've got a finance director and you can't afford to pay the finance director at the moment, so they're on furlough. You may decide that that's a role that you can't afford, you want to make redundant, and it may happen that that person is on furlough. If that's the only person doing that role, then being on furlough is just incidental, really. And as long as your redundancy process is fair, that's fine. If, however, and we see this a lot, you have a few people on furlough and a few people at work doing the same role, you can't just go, well, I want to get rid of those two who are on furlough, because that will be unfair selection. So it might be that you want the people on furlough to go because you might have realised, as a lot of our clients are saying to us, well, I don't really know what they were doing. But you can't automatically select those people on furlough. That can't be one of the criteria. You have to apply the normal objective selection criteria to the whole group, score them, and then your weaker people are then selected as provisionally redundant. So I know you normally know who you want to get rid of. Employers tell us all the time, don't they, Teresa? But you can't just select the people who are on furlough. You've got to follow the fair selection process you would always follow. Teresa, obviously we've been talking about redundancies. Obviously it's a stressful time. Redundancy processes aren't nice for anybody. How, as an employer, can you ensure that the well-being of your employees is, protected as much as possible during this quite stressful time?
Yeah, Katie, as you said, for someone potentially at risk of redundancy and going through consultation, it's always stressful. But I think it particularly is so with the current, pandemic, lockdown, uncertainty about the future and people's finances. We've seen a lot of employers who have employees that are struggling with their mental health. So bearing that in mind, it's really essential that the communications and the consultation meetings are conducted fairly, as they normally would be, but you'd normally be doing them face to face. So we need to make sure as employers that there's support there and that people are getting a fair opportunity to interact during the consultation meetings. Often if a redundancy is happening and it's in the workplace, the person conducting the consultation meetings would normally say, well, if you've got any questions outside of these meetings, then, come and see me, pop and see me. So those conducting the meetings, the consultation meetings, really need to be putting out that olive branch and saying, in between meetings, if you do need any assistance or want any support, I'm at the end of the phone. So offer still those regular catch-ups. Make sure the employee's well-being is fine. Make sure you speak to them outside of just the redundancy consultation meetings, that you're texting them, having a Zoom with them, and making sure that they are okay so that they can discuss any of their concerns. Certainly, a number of employers are, we provide it, is providing counselling, so free counselling helpline for employees. Don't forget to advise them that that is available, any support or helplines that are available, and also give consideration to offering redundancy outplacement services, or point the employees to useful websites and resources like Hayes, for example, or just point them straight to Hayes to see if they can assist them and support them in terms of gaining alternative employment opportunities. They're going to be thinner on the ground, and therefore people are maybe at this time going to push back more in relation to being made redundant. Certainly, there are quite a lot of webinars out there in terms of support to employees working from home, and it's good to share links of those with your employees, the ones that are working, the ones that are on furlough, and indeed the ones that might be going through a redundancy consultation process. We're now turning everyone to the point where you can ask myself, Katie, or Olivia questions. Now, for those of you that have been on our webinars before, you have normally raised your hand. Under this new package, you will see that there is an icon that says Q&A. So if you can put your question in there, and type your question in there, that would be great, and then I will read those out and we will deal with those. If you'd like to ask your question live, so we used to raise your hand if you'd got a question, you can't actually do that with this package. So if you just type in there live question, then we'll come to you live. So if you've got any questions at all about furlough, about recruitment, any of those things that you think Katie, myself, or Olivia would be able to help you with, that's what we're here for. And certainly put your questions up, and we will answer those. So Claire has asked, can we provide the link for the Go One training portal? Yeah, absolutely. So following the today's webinar, what we will do is we always send out a recording. I'll attach to that Olivia's slides, and also Olivia, if you want to provide me with any contact details of yourself or people within the particular local offices, then we'll make sure we share that for all of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send that to you. No problem.
Katie, one for you. John Richmond has asked, can people remain on original furlough leave?
Yes, so thank you for that question. Yeah, flexible furlough is there as another option because employers are now getting back up and running and are wanting people back. So the government has introduced that so that it's not all or nothing, it's like a happy medium. But no, original furlough is still there. So if it's better for you as the employer to keep people on the original furlough, full-time furlough, that's completely fine. That you've got to issue a new letter because it might be that you've only done it for a certain amount of time, so make sure that your documentation's up to date and obviously covers the period of the furlough, so you've got your written evidence. But no, completely fine to keep people on the original furlough. Obviously remember that from August the scheme's going to change and you're going to have to start paying more into it effectively.
Thanks, Katie. Got a question from Jo Page. I'll summarise Jo's question because she emailed me about it earlier. Jo has had an employee who's been on furlough since the beginning of the furlough scheme, in fact, and she's now gone through a redundancy consultation with that employee and is wanting to take advantage of the furlough for the notice period, which she said is a 10-week notice period. And he's refusing to stay on furlough. She's saying in her question that she thinks he wants to come back to the workplace just to stir up trouble so that they don't want him back. Is pay in lieu of notice our only option, she's asking, because they don't really want him back because he's going to, they want to protect their other staff. Now, my answer to Joe earlier, I didn't have all of that information, because the employee had alleged that they'd gone to Hmrc and phoned them up, and Hmrc said, no, your employer can't keep you on furlough during the notice period because it goes against the spirit of the scheme. And I said to Joe, I'm sure they haven't phoned Hmrc, because certainly everybody that is on the furlough scheme is not in a position whereby their job is definitely going to be saved until the end of October and the ending of the scheme. So she's saying, what can she do if he's refusing to stay on furlough? He's actually already been on furlough for a long period of time, so we could try and claim for him, keep him on furlough and claim through Hmrc. The only risk that you run there, Joe, is that he indeed may phone Hmrc and advise them that he didn't agree to be in furlough during this period. So that's a slight risk that you're taking, that he would contact Hmrc. From my point of view, I think your only other option is, to keep him on, is either to pay him in lieu of notice, or if you've got the right in the contract of employment for garden leave, to put him on garden leave for that period. You certainly don't have to have him back into the workplace. Katie, can you think of anything I might have missed there in terms of the employer's options if the employee is refusing to stay on furlough even though they've agreed to before?
I mean, well, no. I mean, obviously, it's normally for the employer, isn't it, to decide who's on furlough and who isn't. So obviously, there's the argument that they've agreed, and obviously, if they've agreed in writing to that point, the agreement's already taken effect. So it's them really going back on the furlough agreement, the employee. So everything you've said is correct. I mean, you might just want to try and push it a bit more.
Yeah. Okay.
On the basis that previously agreed in a written document.
Yeah, it's a slightly tricky one, because most people are quite happy to remain on furlough, thinking, well, at least I haven't got to come into work. You know, I would try and call their bluff by saying, well, we need you back at work, because I think someone would much rather stay at home on 100% pay than come in and work their notice period, to be honest. I know you're worried about him causing trouble, but you know, to actually say, well, this is it, you've got to come in and do some work for your money, I think they might suddenly change their mind and prefer to be on furlough. Lisa is asking, we have some people rolling through furlough and will remain off for the whole of July. What do we pay them? Do we use the new calculation or the old calculation? So Lisa, if they've been on full furlough thus far, and they carry on a full furlough into the whole of July and just carry on the same way as you've been paying them. It's only if they come back under the flexible furlough scheme that the new calculations kick in there. So hopefully that's good news. Just keep them being paid as they have been being paid. Katie, one for you there. What should I consider if one of the selected pool for redundancy is currently on maternity leave? What protection have they got?
Right, so this depends. People on maternity leave have a special protection. Without boring you with the law, it's under Regulation 10. So if you hear anybody talking about maternity and Regulation 10, what that means is they're on maternity leave and they should get, it's basically preferential treatment. So if, for example, you have 5 admin assistants and you need to reduce the number to say 3, if one of those admin assistants is on maternity leave, they have the right to get one of the jobs, they get preferential treatment above the other people. So it's kind of like a positive form of discrimination. But it only applies when someone's on maternity leave, and it only applies if there's other people and an available role. So if that person on maternity leave was the only person doing that role, and you are just abolishing that role, Regulation 10 doesn't really do anything unless there's a suitable role they could do. So someone on maternity leave has a special kind of treatment, and they have to get a job over somebody who's not on maternity leave, as unfair as it sounds. But it only applies when they're on maternity leave, and it only applies if there's a job that's suitable for them to do. So you haven't got to create a new job for them, but they have to get a job over others. Another thing to note there is you can't select somebody because they're on maternity leave or because they're pregnant. Obviously, there's a normal discrimination issue, so you just need to be extra careful where you've got that situation.
Okay, Claire's asking, I'll pick this one up. Does redundancy come into effect if you have to dismiss then re-engage staff on new terms? So I was talking, wasn't I, about dismissal and re-engagement in potential situations where you want to reduce hours and pay, or reduce the pay and keep them working. So Claire's asking me, if they've been with the organisation for over 2 years, does this mean they're entitled to a redundancy payment? No, it doesn't, Claire. If you're not going down redundancy, if you're going through a change to terms and conditions, and you go through the whole process, you're trying to reduce somebody's pay, for example, because because of the pandemic, you feel that they are, their salary is too high, you want to reduce that salary, you consult with them about that. If you then ultimately, having gone through the business case, the consultation, you end up giving them notice because they're not prepared to agree to it, they leave essentially with nothing. So when you give them notice, they're working their notice. Obviously, if there's any accrued holiday, they would get that if they didn't agree to come back. You try and seek to re-engage them on a new contract of employment just with the less pay. They're not entitled to any redundancy. So change in terms and conditions does not entitle them to any redundancy pay. Katie, can you pick the next one up? So that is, can you do consultation meetings? This is Matthew, via online video calls or conference calls or Zooms, or do they have to be face-to-face?
Thanks, Teresa, and thank you, Matthew, for your question. Yes, basically, things are changing slightly, but if you can't do them face-to-face, as for the last 12 weeks, people haven't been able to do them face-to-face, then you can do them over Skype, Zoom, any kind of video conferencing facility that you have, because, okay, face-to-face is always better, but when you can't meet people because of social distancing, you have no other choice. So I've got some clients at the moment who are offering both because we're coming out of lockdown and now they're able to see people. They're offering the choice of both, because some people are maybe on furlough or they're off sick and they don't want to come in. So some of my clients at the moment are saying, well, we can either do it by Skype or we can have a meeting whilst observing social distancing, and obviously give them the option. So I'm sure over the next couple of weeks, we'll see more face-to-face meetings. But if you can't do that and maintain social distancing, or people can't get in, it's completely fine to do them over video conferencing.
Our next question is, if someone has less than 2 years service, can we dismiss on these grounds and not have to include others doing a similar role? I assume you mean on grounds of redundancy or change to terms and conditions. So if someone's got less than 2 years service, then yes, you can select them, provided they haven't got any protected characteristics that would mean that they could bring a discrimination claim, so they don't need any service to bring a discrimination claim, or if they were complaining about health and safety in terms of returning to work, and that's why you selected them irrespective of their service. So it's best probably to get in touch with us and just talk through the circumstances, so that we make sure that you're okay. But per se, yes, you can dismiss someone with less than 2 years service, rather than having to put a whole pool of people at risk of redundancy. If you just want to lose, for example, one person, you can do that if they've got less than 2 years service. But just be careful that they don't go over 2 years service by you keeping them on flexible furlough or on furlough, and the furlough date takes them beyond that 2 years service. You're going to need to make sure it stops before then. was going to say, Katie, you take the next one, but I know you're just going to push it back to me because it's about flexible furlough.
That's you, Teresa.
John Richmond is asking us, once someone is placed on a flexible furlough agreement, can we leave them on it, even when we may have 100% work available for a couple of weeks, then say 50% work, then 0%, back to 100%. So we're not constantly changing the agreements in place. Yes. If you were on Oliver and Mai's last webinar, the last webinar that Oliver and I did, you're best having an agreement within which you say, this is how we're going to agree your hours of work each week. In other words, not having to produce an agreement every week saying, and this week you're working these hours and these days. So just have a procedure in there that basically says, we're going to agree between us the hours and days of work under the flexible furlough scheme, and you only need one agreement signed by the employee rather than having to keep producing them, which is more of a pain. Question for you, Katie. If an employee is working from home, reasonably effective, but we want to insist they return to the place of work, can we insist, and what if they refuse? I've got 2 or 3 of these I'm advising on in the last 10 days, because this seems to be a prevalence that employers are wanting to get people back into the workplace. So what's your answer to that, Katie?
Okay, well, there's a number of things. First of all, if they're working effectively, my first consideration would be, why do you want them back in the office or the workplace? There may be a genuine reason, that's fine, but I think you need to think about that first, because obviously the employee is going to say, well, I've been doing really well, why do I have to come back into work? So you need to kind of have your arguments ready. If you thought about that and you still need them back into work, unless there is a genuine reason why they can't come into work, so the shielding people, which obviously is being phased out from the 1st of August, or they have raised a health and safety issue, which is genuine, then if they haven't got a genuine legitimate reason not to come back in, you have to try and get them back in, but you need to try and work with them, because Teresa and I have seen lots of employees saying things about health and safety. I'm going to bring a health and safety claim, and as Teresa said, you don't need 2 years service to bring that claim. So what you don't want to be doing is forcing people back into work against their own free will, having to go down disciplinary procedures, which get messy, if you can try and appease them. So you need to try and identify why. Are they just being difficult? There are difficult employees and they're creating, random, ridiculous reasons. So you need to identify what the reason is. And if it's not a genuine reason, then you are entitled to say, you have to come back into work. That's a reasonable management instruction. And if you don't, that is a conduct situation. But like I said earlier, you're getting people who can't come in because of childcare issues. So is there a reason that they can't do anything about? And if they can work effectively from home, why would you create a problem? If you've got an employee who's difficult, you know who they are and you know if they're trying it on. But if you've got an employee who's a good worker and you've previously had no issues with, and they have a genuine reason, then don't force them back in if they're working effectively from home. So really, unless there is a genuine reason, you can force them in, but do you want to go there is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, what I've been saying to some of my employer clients is, when they want them to come back into work, is give me 4 or 5 bullet points as to why you are saying you want them to come back to the workplace.
Exactly.
If they've been doing their job reasonably effectively from home, the government guidance is that if they can work from home, they ought to be working from home. So you need to be coming up with some factual reasons why you need them to be coming back to the workplace. You need to be going through and explaining those to the employee to try and then allay, as you say, any concerns and then move to hopefully getting them back. But if they won't agree and they're working effectively from home, you're taking quite a risk going down a disciplinary route with them in terms of forcing them back when the government guidance does currently say that they should be working from home. Lisa's got a bad head, she said. Her head is hurting. This is flexible furlough, so down to me again. We have some people who are returning to work and will work 1 week out of 3. Is that classed as a flexible furlough. My head hurts, she says. So it is classed as a flexible furlough, Lisa, because you will remember that the previously full furlough were people that had been furloughed for 3 weeks or more, and now with the flexible furlough arrangement, it's being done on weeks rather than blocks, and that you've got to put your claim in for the month only that they, from the 1st of July to the end of July. So is it classed as flexible furlough? Yes, it is classed as flexible furlough. But if they're only working 1 week out of 3, for 2 weeks, obviously you'll be paying them the amount that they've been getting under full furlough, and you'll need to do the calculation for the 1 week. It's not straightforward, obviously, as we established in the last webinar. One thing that I heard an accountant say on a webinar this morning was, if you normally calculated your entitlement to pay on working days, not calendar days, he said that as an employer you should continue calculating it on that basis. I'm not sure he is right, however, doing it on that basis, because the government guidance for flexible furlough clearly sets out a calculation which is on the basis of calendar days, not the working days that that particular employee previously or currently works. So I'm afraid, Lisa, yes, you're going to have to do the calculation for the full month for those weeks worked and those not worked. So yeah, over to your accountant, I think, in that respect. Okay, so we've just got 2 other quick questions to go through. Sam has asked, is original furlough and flexible furlough the same claim on the Hmrc portal, or is it 2 separate claims? You can only claim per month, Sam. As far as I know, you're putting in 1 claim, but I must admit I haven't read the detail about that. I don't know whether you have, Katie, at all.
No, I don't either. I just assumed you could only put 1 claim in, because you might be doing flexible or you're doing furlough, just normal furlough. But no, it might be something that we have to look into a bit
Sam,
further.
I'll get back to you with an answer to that. Des has asked a question: how do we treat pension contributions, i.e. for those coming back flexible furlough, if the company scheme is more than auto enrolment? Do you want to take that, Katie, or do you want me to? Yes,
I'll let you do that.
I'll take that as the last question. So at the moment, obviously, the government, Hmrc, are contributing to your pension contributions for your employees on furlough. They carry on doing that for July. They stopped doing that in August. That is separate to your contractual pension contribution. So if your company scheme is more than auto enrolment, you should be paying them whatever percentage it says in the contract of employment. So if it says you're entitled to 5% contributions, my view is you're entitled to 5%, but it's going to be 5% on whatever that employee is paid in that particular week or month. So part of it might be at full pay, part of it might be on 80% pay for under the furlough scheme. So my view is that you ought to pay the 5% on the pay per month or per week, irrespective of the auto enrolment limits. I'm sure you'll agree with me there, Katie.
Yes.
Oh, another question's popped up. So as we started a few minutes late, I'll just take Andy's question and then we'll draw to a close. So Andy has asked, if an employee is contracted 2 full days per week and we require them to come back for 1.5 days, is this possible on flexible furlough? The answer to which is yes, Andy, provided they've been on furlough for at least 3 weeks in the period prior to the 30th of June. Yes, you can get them to come back, agree with them 1.5 days rather than the 2 full days. Thank you everyone for participating in today's live webinar. Great to host it jointly with Hayes. Thank you very much, Olivia. Sorry your slides didn't work. don't know why, we'll blame Zoom. Is there anything that you want to comment on, Olivia, from what we've been discussing about recruitment or helping people get jobs?
Well, just again, that all the content that I talked about was really useful and relevant to all the things that you've been talking about in the webinar today. So definitely check that out, and we'll send the links over to you so you can have a look at it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon, and look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. We'll send some details out in due course. Thank you.
Thank you.